Question. What words or what images come to mind when I simply say the word the desert? Sand? Heat? Barren? Cactus? Brown? Dry? Camel? Hot? Thirsty? Okay. Sounds like you really studied well or you've been to the desert. But notice none of the things really spoke about the fact that there is a beauty to the desert. Through its vegetation, through its cacti, there's something tremendously clear of the sky at night, even sometimes during the daytime. I was looking up something and it said the beauty in the desert is that somewhere is hidden a well. So this sense of the desert is really important because it really serves as a backdrop in our Judeo-Christian tradition. It's really important in our spiritual life dialogue language. The desert represents the place where formation occurred for the Israelites. When they fled from Pharaoh in the great Exodus, they wandered for 40 years in the desert. And it was a time where they became formed as the people of God, with varying degrees of success and setback. So a time and a place of formation. Moreover, in Jesus' Middle Eastern world, it's the cosmology of the world, was that it was in the desert where the spirits, both good and evil, were the inhabitants. And so it wasn't unusual from their perspective that Jesus would go into the desert to do battle with an evil spirit. After all, he was being led by the good spirit. And so it was like taken for granted this would be acceptable. 200, 300 years later, some of the disciples of Jesus began to live as hermits and ourselves in the desert so that they could grow in holiness, self-awareness, and that they too could do spiritual warfare with the demons. Like I said, it's a really important backdrop for the season of Lent and in our church language. More often than not, on this first Sunday of Lent, most preachers, myself included, would focus our homilies on the three temptations Jesus faces and his response to them. This weekend, I'd just simply like to offer for your reflection a little step back from that and to look at simply what are the questions that are being raised by the temptations that Jesus faces, because after all, they were similar to the temptations the Israelites faced, and they are also similar to the temptations you and I faced. First temptation. What am I hungry for? What am I thirsty for? You know, what are the various hungers and thirsts of my life? You know, they can be literally food. There is this sort of craving for this maple long john they serve at QT that I'm skipping right now, but it still is there. I hunger for that. But what do we hunger for in our lives? Maybe it's affirmation, maybe it's to be accepted, maybe it's job satisfaction, maybe it's love. What am I thirsty for? That I fit in, that I'm part of the group. Whatever it is, we have those and we act upon them to quench that thirst, to feed that hunger. What drives my action? Isn't the saying, you never go to the grocery store when you're hungry? Same here. You know, what are we doing as these are my hungers, these are my thirsts, and how am I responding to them? The Israelites didn't deal well with it. They let their hunger and their thirst drive them. They're quite often complaining. Is this all the food we got? Didn't we have this last week? Didn't we have it 2 weeks ago? And where can we get some water? Because water is so crucial in the desert. And this is all we're getting. Jesus, on the other hand, did not allow his hunger to drive his response. I believe it's one of the reasons the church in its wisdom invites us to fast. Among its many fruits, one of them is to remind ourselves that you and I are not self-sufficient enough to take care of our hunger, that we need to be dependent upon someone else. And we do that intentionally when we fast. Temptation number 2. What kind of gods have crept into my life? Now, we might think that's a question for a less sophisticated people. But I really do believe there are other gods that at times become a part of our life. Gods that we worship. And how I get there is this. It's a saying, maybe I just made it up, but it goes to the effect of, where you spend your time, that's where you're living. And where you live is where you're going to worship God. So if I spend all my time in front of this computer, this is where I'm living. Do I begin to worship it? Again, sounds a little under-sophisticated for us, but, where am I spending my time? If you did an inventory of the week that you just spent, where was your time at? And that's where you were living. Were there some other gods that were there? Is it TV? Is it my time? It's like, please don't bother me during my time, even as important as my time is, moms and dads. Is it some other, my possessions? What are the things that I really cling on to that are so important? Does it run my life? And so do I ask myself, is there another God vying for time in my life? Third temptation. What does my trust in God look like for myself and for this parish community? See, the Israelites in their journey were quite prone to test God. Give us another sign that you're with us. Take care of us so we know you're with us. What's the story in today's gospel? Satan says to Jesus, do a 1.5 gainer off the temple. You're going to be saved, and it's going to be quite impressive. And Jesus is having to wrestle with that. How do I trust God? The call is to trust God. Sometimes it means we take a leap of faith. Sometimes we risk. But it also isn't just doing ridiculous things. Again, that's what Jesus was working with, to argue with. There's one thing to use your common sense. But sometimes we are asked to step out and to take a leap of faith. It's the father in the gospel stories who wants his daughter healed, and he says, I do believe, help my unbelief. What do I look for to help me trust more in God? I'll give you a positive side of it for our own parish. This parish from its beginning has had a commitment to tithing 10%. Tithing when budgets are tight and economics aren't good. It's always been a hallmark of who we are. And that, my friends, is an act of trust in God's providence and care for us. That's how we do it. And so that's certainly one way we do it. Here's a commercial. On April 6th and 7th, we've invited those groups that have received money from our tithes to come to the parish so that we could meet them face to face. And so we have an opportunity after all the masses that weekend for a meet and greet. Meet some of the people who have been recipients of the gift that we have shared as a parish. Ultimately, the temptation for Jesus, for the Israelites, and for us was about being authentic, about being true to who he was and whose he was. And the answer to that question is, you are my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. That's what Jesus wrestled with, to be authentic to and to discover what it means. That, my friends, is what you and I are also about during the season of Lent. To discover our authentic selves. Sometimes means I got to let go of a false self. Also means that I can embrace that I belong to God. Am I willing to really live that out? Final thought. And actually it was going to be the first thought because it was a new thought for me. I was thinking over these last few days about the scenes of both readings. For the Israelites, they were led in the desert by an angel, by a cloud, and a pillar of fire. All three of those representative of God being with the people in their journey. Jesus was led by the Holy Spirit into the desert when he began his 40 days of fasting. And why the light bulb that went off was, as I began Lent, did I have a sense that I was being led by God into this season? And the answer is no. I thought a lot about what I was going to do for Lent. Thought about what it means. But did I have a real sense that God was leading me into this period known as Lent? The good news is we can start over. I mean, I already blew my diet with that donut, so we can start today, whatever you're doing for Lent. But as you do it with a sense that it is God leading you, leading me, leading this parish into this time in the desert.